June 26, 1941. Near Minsk, Belarusian SSR. The heat lies heavy over the countryside, thick and breathless, as if the very air itself is holding its breath. Dust hangs in the sunlight, grainy, golden, and gathers on uniforms, faces, and tank hulls like a second skin. The German armored spearheads of Army Group Center push relentlessly eastward, engines rumbling like distant storms. Operation Barbarossa is only 5 days old, and already the Wehrmacht believes it is on the edge of total victory. Oberleutnant Karl Fuchs, commander of a Panzer III platoon in the 7th Panzer Division, stands upright in his turret, leather gloves tucked under his arm, binoculars resting against his chest. He feels invincible. Everyone does. The Soviet forces they have met so far were under-equipped, disorganized, and often fleeing. Horses, not trucks. Old rifles. Tanks that looked like museum pieces. "Just look at this," murmurs Feldwebel Loader, as their tank rolls past a roadside ditch filled with abandoned Soviet BT-7 light tanks. Many are burned out, turrets blown off, tracks snapped, and the German crews laugh as they pass. "Horses and tin cans," another crewman jokes over the intercom. "If this is the Red Army, we'll be in Moscow before harvest." Even the officers have begun to believe the propaganda. The Soviets are backward. Inferior. Weak. But the road ahead looks different today. The column slows, first gradually then to a full halt. Engines idle. Some sputter. The men take off their caps and wipe sweat from their brows. Flies buzz around their faces. There is a tension here, not like the frantic confusion of combat, but a slower, creeping uncertainty. A dispatch motorcycle tears toward the platoon, tires spitting gravel. The rider skids to a stop and dismounts so quickly he nearly falls. His face is pale beneath the dust coating. Herr Oberleutnant. Unknown enemy armor ahead. Not light armor. Something else. The words are strange. The Germans exchange glances. Unknown armor? They have catalogs. Intelligence reports. Identification manuals. There are no unknown Soviet tanks. Or so they believed. Fuchs orders the platoon forward. The engines rev, the clatter of treads grinding through the dry soil. They advance slowly now, careful, watching the tree line ahead. Then, through the summer haze, something moves. At first just a shadow. Then it steps into full view. A T-34. The Germans stare in silence. It is not crude. Not clumsy. Not outdated. It is modern. Purposeful. Deadly. Its hull is sharply angled, no flat plates to easily punch through. Its turret is broad and imposing. Its 76.2 mm gun seems oversized compared to the slim-barreled German cannons. Fuchs feels something he has not felt since the war began. Doubt. Range, 600 meters. Fire, he orders. The Panzer III's 50 mm gun snaps with a crack. The shell strikes the T-34's front plate, and bounces off, screaming away into the fields. Hahn blinks. What? That should have. But another German tank fires. And another. Multiple impacts ring out like church bells struck by a hammer. They do nothing. The T-34 does not flinch. A hatch opens. A Soviet tank commander rises briefly, face blackened with soot, goggles reflecting the sun, then drops back inside. The turret rotates. Slow. Deliberate. Like a predator choosing its target. "Take cover," someone shouts. The T-34 fires. The blast is immense. A German tank to their right erupts, turret blown open like a peeled fruit. The crew scrambles out, screaming, uniforms aflame. The smell of burning fuel and human skin begins to drift through the air. Panic replaces confidence. "Flank it," Fuchs shouts. "Flank it now. Move." But the T-34 is not slow. Its V2 diesel engine roars, and the machine surges forward, crossing broken ground and mud with terrifying ease. Obstacles that would stop a panzer barely slow it down. It is not just armored. It is adapted to this land. The Germans desperately maneuver, trying to get behind it, trying to hit the weaker rear armor, but the T-34 pivots with surprising agility, its tracks biting into earth like claws. Even the machine gun rounds fired from German infantry nearby sound ridiculous, tapping harmlessly against its steel hide. And then, as quickly as it appeared, the T-34 rolls back toward the tree line, its presence a statement, not a retreat. One tank, has stopped a German armored column. Silence fills the battlefield. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of realization. Fuchs finally speaks, voice low. "That is no peasant machine. We misjudged them." Word spreads that night through officers' tents, mess halls, and radio channels. The Soviets have a new tank. And it is better than ours. The myth of German armored invincibility is broken. The news traveled faster than any supply convoy and hit harder than any artillery barrage. Reports of the mysterious Soviet tank flooded headquarters, each account more urgent, more alarmed, more impossible to ignore. June 28, 1941. Army Group Center Forward Command, Baranovichi. The air in the operations tent is thick with cigarette smoke and the heat of too many bodies crowding around a map. Generals and staff officers lean over the table, markers stabbing at arrows that represent divisions advancing deeper into Soviet territory. The mood should be triumphant. The front is moving fast, faster than any war in history. But beneath the confidence sits a fracture. A whisper. A doubt. General Heinz Guderian, father of Germany's armored doctrine, stands stiff-backed, listening as frontline officers present their reports. His jaw tightens just slightly with every mention of the same word. T-34. The officers describe it the same way each time. Sloped armor that deflects shells. A high-velocity main gun capable of destroying German tanks at range. Wide tracks that allow it to move across mud and fields that bog down German armor. A diesel engine that resists fire better than gasoline-fueled Panzer engines. One captain concludes bluntly, trying to keep his voice even. Her general, it is superior to all our current models. Silence follows. No one wants to be the man to say it. No one wants to admit Germany is outmatched. In Berlin, the military command had long believed the Soviet Union incapable of producing anything sophisticated. The German worldview was rooted in racial hierarchy, industrial arrogance, and a confidence that precision engineering equaled superiority. The T-34 shattered that illusion in one afternoon. General Walther Model, known for his razor-sharp sarcasm, snorts dismissively. Crude Soviet machinery. Built in factories with illiterate workers. It can't be as formidable as these reports suggest. Guderian does not argue, but he does not agree. He lights a cigarette, inhaling deeply. Another officer, Major Klaus von Richter, speaks, measured, careful. This is not a question of Soviet industry. Someone, somewhere, designed this with thought. Every feature has purpose. The armor shape, the suspension, the wide tracks. This is not an accident. It is a concept. They don't want to hear the next sentence, but he says it anyway. This tank was built for this land. A murmur of discomfort ripples through the tent. Germany's tanks were engineered for roads, maneuver warfare, speed through European countryside, not the endless marshlands of the East. But the Soviets built something that could crawl through mud, snow, and shattered earth without slowing. It was a weapon of geography. A weapon of survival. And it had been waiting. Meanwhile, back on the lines, word spreads among tank crews like folklore. Men speak in hushed tones over field rations. They shot it 5 times in the front armor and it kept coming. A Panzer IV hit it point blank. Nothing. Just sparks. It moved through a swamp like it was pavement. The invincibility that propelled the German advance had been cracked. Not shattered, but cracked deeply enough for fear to seep in. 300 kilometers away, in a quiet office deep within the OKH Army High Command headquarters, Hitler himself receives the first consolidated report. He reads it once, twice. His eyes narrow. He circles a phrase with a thick pencil stroke. Sloped armor renders standard anti-tank shells ineffective. The irony burns. Germany's military engineers had explored sloping armor years earlier. The idea was elegant. Armor angled at steep degrees became effectively thicker and harder to penetrate without adding weight. But the German Design Bureau rejected it as too complex, too unconventional. The Soviets had implemented it flawlessly. Hitler slams the report onto his desk and calls for his Minister of Armaments. We will match this T-34. We will exceed it, he demands. But designing a new tank takes time. Time the Eastern Front will not grant. Back on the battlefield, Oberleutnant Karl Fuchs and his platoon sit under a stand of birch trees, performing hasty repairs. The burned-out wrecks of German and Soviet armor scar the fields behind them. The crew is silent. No jokes. No boasts. Mechanic Willie scrapes blackened metal from the Panzer's mantlet. Sir, how do we fight a tank we can't kill? He asks quietly. Fuchs does not answer immediately. He looks out across the vast expanse of Eastern Europe, flat, rolling, endless, and imagines hundreds of T-34s coming over the horizon at once. He finally speaks. We don't fight that tank. We avoid it. We flank. We call artillery. We use every trick we know. He looks at his men. And we pray they don't learn faster than we do. But they will. And soon. This is only the beginning. The awareness of the T-34's capabilities was no longer limited to staff maps and intelligence briefings. It was now something German crews faced every hour, every kilometer, every engagement. July 10, 1941. Near Orsha, Belarus. Dawn. Morning mist hangs low over a field churned into muck by weeks of tracked movement. The ground smells of oil, earth, and the faint, metallic tang of scorched steel. A line of Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks sits idle, their crews squatting beside them, eating quickly in the silence that only comes after too many losses. Oberleutnant Karl Fuchs rubs his hands together, trying to drive away the damp. He looks at the fresh layer of mud coating the treads of his Panzer III, remembering the first time he saw a T-34 up close, not in combat but burning, still smoldering. Even destroyed, it looked different, intentional, modern. His loader, Lucas, chews bread slowly. They said this war would be swift, Lucas mutters, staring into the gray horizon. We were supposed to be in Moscow by August. Willie, their mechanic, spits into the mud. We didn't account for this land. Or those tanks. A sharp whistle cuts through the air, orders. Engines fire to life. The ground shakes. Their objective: hold the line near a strategic rail crossing. Soviet forces have been regrouping in the forests beyond, and scouts report armor approaching. No one needs to say what kind. Fuchs climbs into the turret, headset crackling with chatter. Panzer Platoon 3, advance, staggered formation. Do not crest the ridge blind. Repeat, do not crest the ridge. The tanks begin to move, treads sloshing heavily through mud that pulls at them like wet cement. The Panzer III was designed for speed, but here speed is a myth. The land itself is an enemy, pulling, dragging, slowing them to a crawl. Fuchs's tank crests the ridge just enough to reveal the valley. And there, like metal beasts waking from the earth itself, they appear. 5 T-34s, moving in a wide formation, tracks rolling smoothly over terrain that has nearly bogged the German armor to a halt. The Soviets are not even hurrying. Their movements are confident, purposeful, steady. They know. They are the hunters here. Lucas whispers almost reverently. There they are. Fuchs switches to commander's comm. Gun ready. Target the lead tank. Aim for the turret ring. Small chance, but it's what we've got. The gunner, Rolf, dials elevation, breath steady. Range, 800 meters. Fire. The shell streaks across the valley, striking the T-34's sloped glassy plate. Clang. A burst of sparks. No penetration. The Soviet tank keeps moving. No hesitation. No change in speed. Rolf stares stunned. It didn't even. I saw it, Rolf. Load again. But before they can fire, the T-34's gun flashes. The return shell smashes into a Panzer III in their line. The impact is devastating. The German tank erupts into fire, turret hatches flying open as the crew desperately tries to escape. One man collapses halfway out, the flames swallowing him. The German line wavers. Keep formation. Fuchs shouts. But formation against a superior weapon is nothing more than courage measured against steel. Down the line, a German anti-tank gun pivots desperately. A Pak-36, the same gun that served well in France, fires a rapid burst of rounds at the approaching T-34s. The shells strike like pebbles against iron. A Soviet loader watches the sparks dance across their armor and laughs. To the Germans, it is something else entirely. A nightmare made real. Fuchs knows they cannot fight this head-on. Turn. Flank left. We need their side armor. The tank lurches, the engine growling as Willie pushes it to its limits. The Panzer's tracks struggle and slip, throwing mud like waves behind them. But the T-34s glide forward, unconcerned. The battlefield becomes a brutal dance. German tanks scrambling for angles. Soviet tanks pushing relentlessly forward. Smoke and fire blooming across the valley. Rolf manages a shot into the side of one T-34. It punches through. The tank slows, emits smoke, stops. It is the first sign of hope all morning. But one victory changes nothing. There are hundreds more where that one came from. And every factory east of the Urals has begun working day and night. Germany did not just face a tank. They faced an industrial avalanche. A war machine built for endurance, not elegance. A machine that did not need to be polished. Just produced. In endless numbers. As the smoke clears, Fuchs's crew survives, but just barely. The field behind them is littered with the burning skeletons of German armor. Rolf breaks the silence inside the turret. We're not the hunters anymore, are we? Fuchs answers quietly. No. Not today. But what he does not say aloud is what every commander from Berlin to the front now knows. If Germany cannot match the T-34 quickly, this campaign will not be a blitzkrieg. It will be a graveyard. The battlefield had spoken with absolute clarity. The T-34 was not a rumor, not an exaggerated report, not a fluke. It was a superior machine, suited perfectly to the war Germany had chosen to fight. And it was being produced in terrifying numbers. August 1941, Berlin. Reich Ministry of Armaments. A long polished table stretches across the conference room like a runway, lined with some of the sharpest engineering minds in Germany. Blueprints, armor samples, and captured Soviet tank components are scattered across its surface. Standing at the head is Ferdinand Porsche, engineer, industrialist, and personal favorite of Hitler. His suit is immaculate. His confidence unshaken. Beside him, slower in movement but sharper in gaze, stands Heinz Guderian, mud still caked into the seams of his uniform from recent time at the front. The two men could not be more different. Porsche speaks first, tapping the steel sample in front of him. We now have physical proof. This is Soviet armor alloy. It is strong, shockingly strong, given their industrial reputation. Guderian responds quietly, voice measured. No. We underestimated them. Their factories are crude but their design is modern. Purpose-built. The T-34 is not just a tank, it is a concept. A murmur rises from the men around the table. Some do not want to believe it. Some cannot. Some refuse. Porsche gestures to the sloped armor diagram pinned to a board. You all know this principle. We studied it, discussed it, tested it. Years ago. He pauses. And we rejected it. Because it was untraditional. The room shifts uncomfortably. A younger engineer speaks, frustration creeping into his tone. We prioritized machining precision. Smooth armor plating. Complex suspensions. Beautiful machines. Guderian turns, his voice cutting clean through the room. We built tanks like watches. Russia built tanks like hammers. Silence. No one argues. Because the Eastern Front is now proving which philosophy survives war. Meanwhile, deep inside Soviet territory, Tank Factory No. 183 in Nizhny Tagil roars day and night. The entire plant has been relocated east of the Ural Mountains, away from German bombers. Workers labor under portraits of Stalin and thick smoke that turns the air black. Many are women, teenagers, prisoners, former farmers with no industrial background. Yet the assembly lines move with relentless efficiency. Every action is simple, repeatable, fast. A foreman shouts, "Next hull. Weld it. Move it." No polishing. No delicate machining. No obsession with detail. Just production. The Soviets have embraced the brutal math of total war. If one T-34 loses to a Panzer, they will rebuild 2 more. If 10 are destroyed, they will build 50. If a factory burns, another will rise behind it. War by exhaustion. War by replacement. War by inevitability. Back in Berlin, the German engineers move to respond. 2 design paths emerge. 1. Improve the Panzer IV. Increase armor and gun length to match the T-34's performance. 2. Create a new tank entirely. One that mimics or surpasses the T-34. This second path becomes the Panther. Slick, sloped armor. High-velocity 75mm gun. Wider tracks. On paper? Magnificent. In reality? Complex. Over-engineered. Time-consuming. Porsche, always ambitious, pushes for his own competing design, what will eventually become the monstrous Tiger series. Bigger gun. Thicker armor. More intimidation. But big machines require big fuel, big logistics, big maintenance, things Germany is already losing. Guderian knows the truth. What we need is quantity, reliability, speed of production. But Hitler wants giants. He wants monsters. He wants tanks that symbolize dominance, not tanks that win wars. The path is chosen. Reluctantly. Irrecoverably. Autumn 1941, Eastern Front. The weather turns. Mud deepens. Temperatures fall. The Panzer III and IV, still Germany's primary tanks, struggle more with every passing week. Tracks freeze. Engines stall. Gearboxes crack. But the T-34 thrives. Its wide tracks glide over snow. Its diesel engine starts in the cold. Its armor sheds frost and ice without weakening. The Soviet crews are inexperienced, yes, but the machine forgives them. It does not require finesse. It survives. In a frozen trench near Vyazma, Oberleutnant Fuchs warms his hands over a small fire. His men huddle close, steam rising from their breath. Willie, staring into the flames, speaks softly. We build machines that need perfect conditions. They build machines that survive hell. Fuchs nods. The war is changing. Rolf, his gunner, looks up. Then we must change with it. But change takes time. And time is the one resource Germany does not have on the Eastern Front. Because while Berlin debates, designs, and prototypes, the Soviets are already rolling new T-34s into battle every day. And winter has only just begun. The Soviets are already rolling new T-34s into battle every day. And winter has only just begun. December 2, 1941, outside Moscow. Temperature, minus 30 degrees Celsius. The air is so cold it burns the lungs. The German advance has stalled. Engines refuse to turn. Fuel thickens like syrup. Steel becomes brittle. Men wrap rags around their faces, but the wind still slices through. Snow stretches in every direction, white, endless, and silent. Then, the silence breaks. A distant rumble. Not the stuttering cough of German petrol engines, but the slow, rhythmic thundering of diesel pistons. A shape emerges through the blowing snow. Then another. Then another. T-34s. Their hulls are coated with ice. Their tracks crush frozen earth. Their engines roar steadily, unbothered by the cold. Inside one of the lead tanks sits Sergeant Sergei Pavlov, cheeks raw from frost but eyes sharp and steady. His crew is exhausted, but their machine is strong. The T-34's diesel engine starts easily, even in conditions where German tanks fail completely. Pavlov looks through the frost-rimmed periscope and sees shapes struggling in the snow ahead. German infantry. Some stand. Some kneel. Some lie motionless, frozen where they fell. Their tanks? Most are dead, locked in place by ice, their lubricants frozen, their optics fogged, their tracks stiff and unyielding. Pavlov raises his hand. Forward. The commander's hatches open, snow blows in. But it doesn't matter. The T-34 is built for this. German lines, same moment. Unteroffizier Fuchs and his men watch in stunned disbelief. Rolf's voice cracks as he whispers. They're moving. In this cold, they're actually moving. Willie's jaw tightens. We're not fighting soldiers anymore. We're fighting their machines. Fuchs does not answer, because he is watching something that shakes him. The Soviet tanks do not slow. They do not slip. They do not shudder. They belong in this environment. The German panzers do not. A sudden engagement. A Panzer III crew desperately tries to ignite their engine. The starter groans, once, twice, then stops. The T-34 does not wait. Its 76mm gun flashes. White smoke punches out into the cold air. The Panzer III's turret bursts with shrapnel and fire. Rolf grips his rifle tighter. They're tearing through us. Fuchs finally speaks, voice low. No. They're driving through our mistakes. Meanwhile, Soviet command headquarters. General Georgy Zhukov stands over a massive field map, red arrows pushing westward toward Moscow's outskirts. Reports come in. T-34 units advancing through frozen terrain successfully. Enemy armor immobile. Morale weakening. Zhukov nods once and speaks to his staff calmly. This is not about killing the enemy. This is about breaking them. The T-34 is not just a tank. It is now a symbol. A symbol that the Red Army is not collapsing. A symbol that the Soviet Union will not die quietly. A symbol that winter belongs to Russia as it always has. German High Command receives the news. December 6, 1941. Hitler's headquarters, Wolfschanz. The situation reports are delivered. Tank battalion losses. Frozen engines. Supply shortages. And one repeated observation. The enemy T-34 performs exceptionally in winter conditions. Hitler slams his fist onto the table. This is sabotage. Treason in our engineering departments. How could we be outdone by Soviet industry? But his officers know the truth. They were warned. By scouts. By field officers. By Guderian. By the battlefield itself. They simply refuse to believe it. Back on the front. Snow still falls. German troops retreat step by step. The once unstoppable blitzkrieg has frozen in place. The T-34 rolls onward, slow but relentless, crushing snow and steel beneath its tracks. Rolf watches, voice barely a whisper. Maybe, war isn't won by the best army. Fuchs nods. War is won by the army that learns fastest, endures longest, and refuses to die. The T-34 does not roar triumphantly. It simply continues forward. Unstoppable. The T-34 does not roar triumphantly. It simply continues forward. Unstoppable. January 1942, Rassenburg, East Prussia. The atmosphere inside the Wolfschanz command bunker is thick and claustrophobic. Cigarette smoke curls between the beams of harsh yellow light hanging low over a long map table. Snow sweeps against the concrete walls outside, but the real storm is happening inside. Around the table stand some of Germany's most respected armored commanders. General Heinz Guderian, architect of Blitzkrieg. Colonel General Franz Halder, head of the Army General Staff. General Walter Model, tough, analytical, unflinching. And above them, pacing, furious, is Adolf Hitler. A messenger has just delivered the most recent report from the Eastern Front. The Soviet T-34 is superior to all German tanks currently fielded. Immediate countermeasures are necessary. Hitler slams the paper down. The Russians? Out-engineering us. He almost chokes on the words. Guderian, exhausted from his recent return from the Moscow counteroffensive, speaks, carefully. My Führer, this is not a matter of pride. The T-34 has features we never anticipated. Sloped armor, wide tracks, a powerful gun, and the ability to operate in all seasons. Our Panzer III and IV were not built for such conditions. Hitler's eyes narrow. So build something better. Bigger. Stronger. Guderian shakes his head. Bigger isn't the answer. Not in Russia. Not in mud. Not in winter. We don't need larger tanks. We need smarter ones. Halder steps forward with a recommendation. We propose studying captured T-34s. Dismantling them. Finding what makes them so efficient. Hitler stops pacing. He stares at the map of Russia. At the growing red arrows pushing west. At the shrinking black lines marking German positions. For the first time in months, he is afraid. Meanwhile, Kharkov Repair Depot, Soviet Union. Rows of damaged T-34s line the snow-covered yard. Some have shattered tracks. Some have holes punched through their armor. Some still smell of smoke and burned fuel. But Soviet engineers and factory workers swarm around them like surgeons. The T-34 was designed to be easy to repair, even in field workshops miles from supply lines. Replacement parts are interchangeable. Components are simplified. Tools are basic and universal. A mechanic wipes snow from his hands and knocks a pin back into place with a steel mallet. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. The machine is built to return to the fight quickly. In the distance, a train whistle echoes. Another shipment of brand-new T-34s arrives directly from the factory at Stalingrad, already warmed, fueled, and ready to roll. German Tank Design Bureau, Kassel. Engineers gather around a captured T-34 hauled from the front lines. It sits in the center of a workshop like a trophy, or a warning. They examine the armor. They measure the slope. They trace their hands across the steel. It shouldn't be possible, one murmur. But it is, another replies. They sketch. They calculate. They argue. Finally, one engineer says what they're all thinking. If we do not build our own answer to this tank, the Eastern Front is lost. Thus begins the design work for a new armored beast. Thick, sloped armor, long-barreled high-velocity cannon, wide tracks for deep mud and snow. A tank that will come to be known as the Panther. But designing a tank and fielding one are not the same thing. And while Germany struggles to build, test, refine, and mass-produce, the T-34 is already fighting. Today. Field Report, Eastern Front, late 1942. Unteroffizier Fuchs sits in the snow beside a burned-out Panzer IV. He watches another column of T-34s roll by, not fast, not elegant, but inevitable. Willie, his closest friend, speaks quietly. They never stop coming, do they? Fuchs shakes his head. No. And that's the point. Rolf stares after the tanks, eyes hollow. Maybe we were never supposed to win here. Not on this land. Not against these machines. Snow falls. Engines fade. And the Eastern Front continues to bleed. Snow falls. Engines fade. And the Eastern Front continues to bleed. May 1943, Kummersdorf Proving Grounds, Germany. A crowd of officers, engineers, and armament officials gather around a newly unveiled machine. The air smells of engine oil, steel dust, and cold spring rain. There it stands. The Panzerkampfwagen V, Panther. Its armor is sharply sloped, inspired directly by the T-34. Its turret is larger, angular, housing the deadly 7.5 cm KWK-42, a high-velocity cannon capable of punching through Soviet steel at over 1,000 meters. Wide tracks grip the testing ground, built to survive the same mud that swallowed Germany's earlier tanks. Colonel General Heinz Guderian watches in silence. Engineers stand proudly. Officers murmur approval. For a moment, just a moment, Germany believes it has its answer. The Panther is fast, deadly, powerful. But there is a problem. Not one problem. Many. July 1943, the Eastern Front, south of Kursk. The Panther's engines roar across the battlefield. But inside the turrets, crews battle something as dangerous as any Soviet gun. Overheating. Transmission failures. Engine fires. Even before the tanks engage, several are abandoned on the roadside, thick black smoke rising skyward. One tank commander, Feldwebel Kramer, slams his fist against the metal hatch. All this engineering, and they forgot reliability. His radio crackles. The order arrives. Advance. Engage the Soviet lines. He curses but signals his driver. The tank rumbles forward. Ahead lies the largest armored clash in human history. The guns speak. The battlefield erupts with fire. T-34s emerge from the treeline like ghosts of steel, engines howling, tracks tearing through soft earth. Dust, smoke and burning fuel thicken the air until the sun itself is just a pale disk behind the haze. The Panther fires. Its shells strike true. One T-34 bursts into flame, crew scrambling out, silhouettes desperate and small. But for every T-34 destroyed, two more push forward. The Soviets do not rely on elegance or perfection. They rely on numbers, on simplicity, on relentless production. Inside a Panther turret, the gunner wipes sweat from his brow. The steel walls tremble from each recoil. They just keep coming, he whispers. Guderian, Headquarters Review. Weeks later, the first combat reports returned to Berlin. The Panther killed tanks. Many tanks. It performed brilliantly when it worked. But the breakdown rate was catastrophic. Guderian holds the reports silently for several minutes. When he finally speaks, his words are heavy. We built a weapon for an ideal battlefield. But the battlefield does not care about our ideals. He looks out the window toward the snow-covered courtyard, where more Panthers sit, engines being repaired, hoses trailing across the ground. We are trying to outdesign a tank that was not built to be beautiful, he says quietly. It was built to win. Meanwhile, Soviet Union Ural factories. The T-34 roars off the assembly line every 15 minutes. Welders do not stop. Workers barely pause. Supply trains run day and night. There is no ceremony. No testing parade. No speeches. The tanks are shipped straight to the front. Many are still warm from the factory floor when they roll into battle. A Soviet worker wipes metal dust from her face, exhausted but unwavering. A foreman shouts over the grinding machinery. Every tank is a soldier. She doesn't look up. She just keeps welding. The rhythm continues. Steel. Fire. Sweat. Steel. Fire. Sweat. The war machine turns. And as the Eastern Front stretches into its second brutal winter, it becomes clear. Germany built a masterpiece. But the Soviet Union built a war-winning machine. Germany built a masterpiece. But the Soviet Union built a war-winning machine. November 1943, near Smolensk, Russia. The frozen ground cracks beneath the tracks of approaching T-34s. Frost bites at the noses and ears of the German defenders. Snow stings like tiny needles. Visibility is limited, but the Soviets push forward with relentless, mechanized determination. Lieutenant Colonel Heinrich Müller crouches in a ruined farmhouse, binoculars pressed to his eyes. Through the swirling snow, he sees them, dozens of T-34s gliding over terrain that should have bogged down any conventional tank. Wide tracks distribute their weight. Sloped armor deflects incoming shells. The Germans open fire, yet the tanks advance, absorbing damage and returning fire with the 76.2 mm F-34 gun. He mutters under his breath, almost to himself. It's unstoppable. The Soviet strategy. The T-34 is more than a tank. It is the embodiment of Soviet doctrine. Mobility, simplicity, and mass. Commanders like General Georgy Zhukov deploy them in waves. Each tank supports infantry, artillery, and supply units. Crews coordinate through radios, a luxury earlier German models often lacked. Even inexperienced soldiers can operate the T-34 effectively due to its intuitive design. At one forward outpost, Private Ivan Petrov grips the steering wheel, a young man no older than 19. Around him, comrades shout orders and fire their machine guns. Dust and smoke swirl as they roll into the German lines. He thinks only of the task. Keep moving, stay alive, win. German countermeasures fail. Back at German headquarters, engineers scramble. The Panzer IV is upgraded with the long-barreled 75 mm gun. Panthers are deployed in greater numbers. Tiger I tanks arrive. Immense, intimidating, almost impervious to older Soviet shells. Yet each countermeasure faces the same issue: the T-34 keeps coming. Field reports pile up. Panther breakdowns in the mud and snow, Tigers immobilized by logistical shortages, Panzers outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Even Heinz Guderian admits in private memoranda. We designed perfection, but they designed effectiveness. Winter 1943-44. The battle for Ukraine. The T-34's versatility shows in a campaign of encirclements and counterattacks. Snow-packed fields and frozen rivers become highways for Soviet armored units. German troops, expecting to crush what they thought were outdated tanks, find themselves surrounded and outgunned. One captured German soldier later recalls, "I thought the T-34s were toys when we first saw them. We laughed. They were beautiful machines compared to our old tanks, but harmless, we believed. Then they came. We were gone in hours." The stories of T-34s plowing through fortified positions spread among German units, sowing doubt, fear, and frustration. The psychological impact. The T-34 is not only a weapon of steel but a psychological force. German officers who once mocked it are now forced to respect its existence. Rumors circulate of Soviet crews performing repairs under fire, tanks returning to battle despite heavy damage, and production lines churning out replacements faster than Germany can destroy them. Hitler, furious in his war rooms, demands new designs, heavier guns, and thicker armor. Yet every innovation arrives after the T-34 has proven its dominance in the field. Time and momentum favor the Soviets. Strategic shift. By mid-1944, the T-34 is no longer merely a tank. It is a symbol of Soviet resilience and industrial ingenuity. Entire offensives, such as Operation Bagration, rely heavily on the T-34's mobility and durability. Cities like Minsk, Vitebsk, and Smolensk fall under the relentless advance of mechanized Soviet forces. German defenses crumble under this combination of quantity, quality, and tactical audacity. Officers who once scoffed at the tank now issue orders to build heavier and faster versions. But nothing can match the sheer impact of the T-34 on the Eastern Front. Conclusion: the tank that changed war. The T-34 rewrote armored warfare. Its sloped armor, wide tracks, and simple design forced Germany to rethink tactics, engineering, and strategy. It turned mockery into terror, hesitation into loss, and numerical inferiority into a manageable disadvantage. By the time the Red Army enters Poland and advances toward Berlin in 1945, the German High Command has finally acknowledged the truth they refused to see. The T-34 was more than a tank. It was a war-winning machine. By the time the Red Army enters Poland and advances toward Berlin in 1945, the German High Command has finally acknowledged the truth they refused to see. The T-34 was more than a tank. It was a war-winning machine. Spring 1945, Eastern Europe. The snow has melted into mud and rain, but the T-34s continue to roll across the battered landscape. Cities are reduced to rubble and rail lines destroyed, yet Soviet armor moves with relentless precision. The once feared German fortifications now serve as mere obstacles to a tide of steel and fire. Captain Sergei Volkov, an experienced T-34 commander, watches as a column of his tanks crosses the Oder River. Bridges have been destroyed, but engineers lay makeshift pontoons, and the tanks trundle across, unbothered by the chaos around them. For Volkov, every day in his T-34 confirms a truth that began at Kursk and Stalingrad. Design simplicity plus tactical genius equals dominance. Global attention and recognition. Even as the war draws to a close, the T-34's influence spreads beyond the Eastern Front. Allied officers, after witnessing captured Soviet tanks, note the practical brilliance of the design. American and British engineers record details of the sloped armor, the wide tracks, and the reliable engines. During post-war conferences, Soviet engineers demonstrate the robust suspension system and the relative ease of production that allowed the USSR to field tens of thousands of T-34s. Western militaries quietly incorporate these lessons into post-war tank design, from the American M26 Pershing to the British Centurion. The T-34's design philosophy, simplicity, effectiveness, and adaptability, becomes a cornerstone of Cold War armored warfare. Industrial and tactical lessons. The tank's wartime story highlights the interplay between industry and tactics. The Soviets optimized mass production in factories that had been evacuated from the West, ensuring continuity under enemy bombardment. The combination of rapid production, battlefield resilience, and straightforward maintenance created a weapon that outpaced German countermeasures. In Moscow, engineers recall, We didn't aim for perfection, we aimed for survival and effectiveness. The T-34 was a tool to keep the Red Army moving. The Germans, meanwhile, continued to design sophisticated machines like the Tiger II, but these tanks often required intensive maintenance, consumed enormous resources, and could not be produced in the numbers necessary to stem the Soviet advance. A symbol of Soviet resolve. By the end of 1945, as Europe lies in ruins, the T-34 emerges as a symbol of Soviet ingenuity and resilience. Monuments in cities liberated by Soviet forces occasionally feature the tank, commemorating not only the soldiers but also the industrial and engineering triumph that underpinned their victories. Veterans recall the T-34 not only as a weapon but as a companion, an armored partner that moved through mud, snow, and fire, absorbing punishment while enabling decisive action. Its presence on the battlefield shaped morale, fear among the enemy, confidence among the Soviets. Postwar adaptation and legacy. The T-34's design principles influenced decades of armored warfare. Across Eastern Europe and Asia, post-war tanks bear its fingerprints. Sloped armor for deflection, wide tracks for mobility on diverse terrain, and mechanical simplicity for ease of repair. Wars in Korea, Vietnam, and the Middle East saw the T-34 itself in action or inspired derivatives, proving that its impact extended far beyond the immediate conflict. Military strategists and historians often cite the T-34 as one of the most influential armored vehicles of the 20th century, reshaping doctrines and forcing an entire continent to reconsider armored strategy. Reflection and historical perspective. For German commanders who had once laughed at the T-34, reflection comes in post-war memoirs and interrogations. Generals and engineers alike admit that their underestimation of Soviet capability was a fatal mistake. Hitler's officers, who had mocked its rugged exterior and apparent simplicity, came to understand that it was the combination of design, production, and tactical doctrine that made the T-34 nearly unstoppable. Even decades later, military historians describe the Eastern Front as the theater where the T-34 rewrote the rules of armored combat, proving that sometimes innovation lies not in complexity, but in effectiveness under pressure. The T-34 began as a weapon dismissed as crude and unsophisticated. It ended as a legend of the Eastern Front, a vehicle whose design forced the Wehrmacht to rethink armored warfare, delayed German advances, and ultimately contributed decisively to Soviet victory. The story of the T-34 is not just a tale of steel and fire, it is a lesson in innovation, adaptation, and the courage to defy conventional expectations. The story of the T-34 is not just a tale of steel and fire, it is a lesson in innovation, adaptation, and the courage to defy conventional expectations. Early 1946, Moscow, Soviet Union. Snow blankets the grounds outside the GAZ and KHPZ factories where the T-34s were once churned out in thousands. Inside, engineers pore over blueprints and post-war assessments, carefully cataloging lessons learned from the Eastern Front. The clatter of machinery has quieted, but the echoes of war linger in every line drawn and every component measured. Colonel Nikolai Petrov, now a consultant for Soviet armored development, observes a small model of a T-34 next to newer prototypes. His voice, measured and reflective, carries a tone of pride. The T-34 was never just a tank. It was a philosophy, production, mobility, and durability as one. Impact on military doctrine. The T-34 forced militaries worldwide to reconsider tank doctrine. In Germany, post-war analysis highlighted that even the most powerful or technologically advanced tank is worthless if it cannot be fielded in sufficient numbers or if logistics fail. The Soviet experience demonstrated that quantity paired with rugged design can overcome even superior individual machines. NATO strategists studying the war during the late 1940s often used the T-34 as a case study in armored warfare courses. Lessons in combined arms, mobility in rough terrain, and the importance of maintenance in prolonged campaigns were emphasized, with the T-34 as the quintessential example. Enduring industrial influence. The T-34 also shaped industrial approaches to wartime production. Factories in the Soviet Union had mastered the evacuation of critical industries eastward under fire, creating a template for resilient production networks. Engineers examined every welding technique, every casting method, and every assembly line process, realizing that a weapon's battlefield performance is inseparable from the ability to produce it reliably at scale. Workshops in Eastern Europe replicated and modified the T-34, while even Western nations carefully studied its wide tracks, sloped armor, and simple yet effective engine systems. The design inspired future generations of armored vehicles, including the T-54/55, the PT-76 and beyond, proving that wartime necessity can drive timeless engineering solutions. Survivor stories and soldier perspectives. Former Soviet tank crews recount the T-34 with reverence. Sergeant Ivan Morozov, who survived the Battle of Kursk, recalls, "The T-34 saved my life more than once. The Germans would laugh at its looks, then scream when it appeared in force. We trusted it and it never let us down." The tank was as much a psychological weapon as a physical one. Its presence on the battlefield lifted morale, instilled confidence in Soviet troops and inspired awe and fear in enemy forces. For many soldiers, the T-34 was more than a machine. It was a symbol of Soviet resilience. Global legacy. By the 1950s, T-34s remained in service in multiple armies, from Eastern Europe to Asia. They fought in conflicts long after World War II, demonstrating that the tank's durability, adaptability, and simple design were not confined to one battlefield. Military historians emphasize that the T-34's enduring influence reshaped armored warfare doctrine worldwide, from the Korean War to the Arab-Israeli conflicts. In museums, preserved T-34s serve as silent teachers, showing how ingenuity, speed, and practical design can overcome technological superiority. Engineers, historians, and military enthusiasts continue to study the tank as a masterclass in the art of balancing production capability, battlefield survivability, and tactical flexibility. Reflection on German underestimation. For the German generals who had once mocked the T-34, the post-war reality was a bitter acknowledgement of their error. Their underestimation was not a failure of bravery or skill but a failure to understand innovation under pressure. The T-34's success demonstrated that battlefield superiority is often determined as much by design philosophy and industrial capacity as by strategy or tactics. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's observation after reviewing captured T-34s resonated with future generations. A tank's power lies not only in its gun or armor but in its ability to survive, move, and strike when it matters most. The T-34's story is a testament to the unseen heroes of war, the engineers, factory workers, and tacticians who combined ingenuity with persistence. It reshaped the Eastern Front, forced the Wehrmacht to adapt, and left a legacy that continues to influence armored warfare even today. The tank that Hitler's officers mocked became the machine that changed the course of a continent, proving that innovation, courage, and practical design can overturn even the most entrenched expectations. July 5, 1943, Kursk salient, Soviet Union. The sun struggles to pierce a smoky, heat-hazed morning. Dirt churns beneath endless tracks as the German Wehrmacht's 4th Panzer Army rolls toward the northern edge of the Kursk salient. Soldiers brace themselves for what they believe will be another swift, decisive breakthrough, blitzkrieg perfected. Yet on the horizon, the ground trembles not from German engines but from the rumbling advance of hundreds of T-34s, a rolling wall of steel and firepower. Captain Sergei Ivanovich Petrov of the 57th Guards Tank Brigade scans the fields through his binoculars. The smell of gun oil, burnt diesel, and scorched earth hangs thickly in the air. Around him, crews scramble into their T-34s, closing hatches and checking their 76.2 mm F-34 guns. The tank's wide tracks tear through muddy trenches and anti-tank obstacles, shrugging off shell-pocked terrain that would stall German Panzer IVs and Tigers. German shock and tactical adjustment. For German commanders, the T-34s are an unexpected revelation. Major Heinrich Schultz of the 6th Panzer Division mutters, examining a knocked-out T-34's wreck. "The armor, it's angled, it deflects shots that should have penetrated. And these tracks, they cross terrain we could barely imagine." The sloped armor, initially dismissed as rudimentary, proves devastatingly effective against German 37 mm and 50 mm guns. The wide tracks distribute weight evenly across soft fields, preventing bogging in mud, a flaw that had repeatedly plagued German advances in 1941. Officers issue new orders: avoid head-on attacks, concentrate artillery, call in heavier guns, and adapt quickly to the enemy's mobility. Yet, even with superior training and firepower, the Germans discover that quantity and tactical cohesion can overpower individual brilliance. Waves of T-34s advance in coordinated formations, supported by infantry and artillery in combined arms assaults that German doctrine struggles to counter. Soviet innovation and adaptation. Behind the front lines, Soviet commanders are not content with raw numbers alone. Lieutenant Colonel Mikhail Sokolov oversees the integration of reconnaissance, mobile artillery, and signals to maximize T-34 effectiveness. Each tank's radio facilitates real-time coordination, a factor that confounds German officers accustomed to less connected units. Smoke trails mark the positions of advancing infantry, while T-34s spearhead the breakthrough through minefields and defensive belts. Engineers follow closely, removing obstacles and laying improvised bridges to maintain momentum. Petrov drives his tank past flattened hedgerows and shell craters, each movement a testament to the T-34's balance of firepower, armor, and mobility. The human dimension. Inside each T-34, crews are acutely aware of the tank's strengths and limitations. Sergeant Pavel Morozov grips the firing wheel as shells explode nearby, shrapnel pinging against the steel hull. A glance to his left shows Private Alexei Zhukov operating the loader, eyes fixed on the battlefield. Communication is terse, action synchronized, a choreography honed in bitter combat across Ukraine and Smolensk. The battlefield is chaotic, filled with smoke, fire, and the cacophony of armored warfare. Yet amidst this chaos, the T-34 crews move with purpose. Their confidence in the machine grows with every successful engagement, turning what German officers thought a crude tank into a formidable spearhead capable of dictating the pace of battle. Strategic consequences. By the third day of the Battle of Kursk, the impact of the T-34 is undeniable. German armored formations, once dominant, are slowed, forced into defensive maneuvers, and subjected to attrition that undermines offensive plans. Soviet commanders exploit the terrain, the mobility of their tanks, and the sheer mass of their armored units to encircle and neutralize German forces. Historian accounts emphasize that the T-34 shifted the operational calculus of the Eastern Front. No longer could Germany rely solely on tactical skill and advanced weapons. The combination of rugged design, numbers, and innovative Soviet tactics forced a re-evaluation of armored warfare that would reverberate for the remainder of the war. As night falls over the Kursk salient, firelight flickers off the angled armor of T-34s, casting long shadows across shattered fields. The machines, battered but operational, form an armored wall that German commanders cannot breach. Smoke curls into the sky, carrying with it the evidence of a war in which underestimation can no longer be tolerated. Captain Petrov climbs onto his tank's hull for a brief survey, binoculars in hand. The distant rumble of retreating German forces is faint but unmistakable. He smiles, exhausted but resolute, and mutters to himself, "They mocked us. They thought us weak. Tomorrow we prove otherwise." July 10, 1943, German High Command, East Prussia. The map-strewn war room is thick with cigar smoke and tension. General Heinz Guderian, face creased from years of armored campaigns, pounds a fist on the oak table. Charts, aerial photographs, and reconnaissance reports litter every surface. The news from Kursk has arrived, puncturing years of German confidence. The T-34 is not just surviving, it is dominating. "These Soviets," Guderian mutters, his voice low and dangerous, "they have taken our own tactics and improved them. Their armor is faster, more resilient, and they move with coordination we cannot break." Around him, officers shuffle uneasily. Oberst Werner Lang, head of Panzer Development, flips through diagrams of the T-34, tracing the sharp slope of its armor with a finger. "We must design a gun capable of piercing this monstrosity. Our current 50mm rounds are useless at any realistic combat distance." The German response is immediate and all-consuming. Laboratories and factories pivot to produce heavier guns, new ammunition, and modified Panther and Tiger tanks capable of countering the T-34's resilience. Engineers labor through nights under artificial lights, sketches of angled hulls and reinforced turrets accumulating on drafting tables. It is an arms race born of necessity, driven by humiliation and fear. The reality on the Eastern Front. Meanwhile, back on the ground, the T-34s continue to press forward, exploiting every gap and weakness in German lines. Lieutenant Colonel Viktor Morozov directs a battalion of T-34s through sun-scorched fields and destroyed villages. Each maneuver is precise, relying on radio coordination and tactical flexibility. German panzer divisions attempt to adapt, using ambushes, combined artillery barrages, and massed infantry to halt the Soviet advance. But the T-34s shrug off attacks that would have stopped earlier Soviet models. Tracks crush trenches, shells glance off angled armor, and the 76.2mm guns obliterate bunkers and lighter vehicles. In one vivid encounter near Prokhorovka, a line of T-34s charges a reinforced German position. Smoke and dust obscure the battlefield, but the tanks press on relentlessly. Crew members shout terse commands, bullets ricochet against hulls, and the ground shakes with the roar of engines. German officers watch in disbelief as machine after machine crushes defenses once thought impregnable. The psychological impact. It is not only the physical destruction that unnerves the Germans, it is the psychological shock. Veteran panzer commanders, trained to respect precision and technological superiority, are forced to confront a foe who has upended their assumptions. The T-34's durability and simplicity become emblematic of Soviet ingenuity under pressure. Private Kurt Meinhardt, a panzer crewman, records in his journal. "They mocked us. They laughed at what they thought was crude machinery. Yet these tanks move like shadows across the fields, and each time one appears, it feels as if our world shifts beneath us." This sense of disorientation spreads through German ranks. Orders become cautious, hesitations multiply, and confidence, once a hallmark of the Wehrmacht, erodes. Soviet adaptations and innovation. The Soviets, aware of German countermeasures, continue to evolve. Tank crews experiment with combined arms tactics, integrating T-34s with anti-tank artillery, mobile infantry, and air reconnaissance. Engineers implement minor modifications in the field, reinforcing vulnerable points, adding extra fuel tanks, and improving mobility for muddy terrain. Every success emboldens the crews and cements the T-34's reputation. Stories spread of tanks that charge through minefields, survive multiple hits, and still return to fight the next day. The T-34 becomes more than metal. It is a symbol of resistance, resilience, and Soviet innovation. As twilight settles over the eastern plains, German officers reconvene in bunkers to assess the latest losses. Maps show retreats, pockets of Soviet advances, and routes the T-34s have carved into what was once considered German territory. The sense of disbelief persists. The T-34 has changed the nature of armored warfare, forcing a technological and tactical reckoning. In the distance, the muffled growl of engines signals the continued advance of the next wave of Soviet tanks. German generals look on, realizing the grim truth. Underestimation has become catastrophic, and the T-34 is not merely a weapon, it is a force rewriting the Eastern Front. July 5, 1943, Kursk salient, Soviet Union. The morning sun barely pierces the heavy smoke hanging over the vast fields of Kursk. Trenches zigzag like scars across the earth, interspersed with shattered buildings and the skeletal remains of farm equipment. In the distance, the rumble of thousands of engines grows steadily, a metallic heartbeat warning of the storm to come. Colonel Dmitry Petrov, commanding the 5th Guards Tank Brigade, crouches in the hatch of his T-34, goggles fogged with sweat and grime. Around him, tanks line up in seemingly endless columns, each painted with the Soviet Red Star, their turrets swiveling, guns loaded, and engines growling in unison. He peers through binoculars at the German lines, barely visible through a haze of smoke, dust, and dust clouds kicked up by artillery. "Steady, comrades," Petrov calls, his voice swallowed by the roar of engines. "Today we show them the steel heart of the motherland." The opening salvo. At precisely 0500 hours, German artillery erupts along the horizon. Shells explode in violent plumes, spraying mud and debris, forcing some T-34 crews to press closer to the earth. Yet the tanks press forward, their wide tracks devouring trenches and shell craters alike. Lieutenant Ivan Sokolov watches his T-34 absorb a near-direct hit from a German 75mm PaK-40 anti-tank gun. The shell glances off the sloped armor, leaving a shallow dent as smoke curls from the impact point. Sokolov grins grimly. "Try that again, Herr Captain." The T-34s move as a coordinated wave, advancing under cover of artillery and smoke. Infantry units move alongside, using the tank's armored bulk as protection against machine gun fire. The combination of sloped armor, mobility, and coordinated infantry tactics begins to overwhelm German defensive positions, forcing local commanders to reconsider their assumptions about Soviet armor. German counterattacks. By mid-morning, German panzer divisions, including the feared Tigers and Panthers, attempt to counter the T-34 onslaught. Field Marshal von Manstein directs the movements from a forward command post, his fingers tracing the map as he barks orders through a field telephone. "Flank them here. Concentrate fire on the bridgehead," he demands, voice cracking with urgency. Yet the T-34s are agile and resilient. They twist and pivot through muddy fields, pressing forward despite concentrated fire. Even when hit, their design allows crews to escape and regroup. Observing from his vantage point, Captain Wilhelm Hartmann, a German armor officer, mutters, "We are facing a tank unlike any we've ever known. Nothing we have can stop it reliably." Tactical innovation on the Eastern Front. Soviet commanders leveraged the T-34's strengths to maximum effect. By integrating artillery barrages, infantry suppression, and rapid advances, they force German forces into a defensive posture. Radio communications hum with coordination as tank commanders adjust on the fly, rerouting units around destroyed vehicles and collapsing positions. Petrov's battalion crosses a cratered road where German infantry lie in wait. He orders a wedge formation, and the tanks crush machine gun nests and barbed wire with ease. The Germans fire back with precision, yet for every T-34 disabled, another advances from the rear, maintaining momentum. The psychological toll. The Germans, confident in their armor superiority, feel the T-34's impact not just physically but psychologically. Officers and soldiers alike are shaken. The German field manual, once considered infallible, offers little guidance against the combination of speed, armor and ingenuity the Soviets now display. Oberstleutnant Friedrich Krüger, observing the battlefield through binoculars, scribbles in his notebook, "The Soviets' crude tanks perform feats our engineers considered impossible. Their armor is deceptive, their crews fearless. We cannot underestimate them." As dusk settles over the scarred landscape of Kursk, fires burn where tanks collided and earth was torn apart by artillery. The T-34s, battered yet unbowed, hold positions the Germans had assumed impossible. Soviet infantry and tank crews share brief moments of exhaustion and triumph, knowing they have changed the course of the battle, and, perhaps, the war itself. The day ends not in victory or defeat but in stark realization. The T-34 is no longer just a tank. It is a force that demands respect, adaptation, and a complete overhaul of German armored doctrine. The Eastern Front will never be the same. August 1943, Panzer Factories, Germany. The air inside the Krupp and Henschel manufacturing plants is thick with heat, smoke, and the smell of molten steel. Sparks fly from welding torches as assembly lines hum like living beasts, the clank of gears and the hiss of hydraulics forming a mechanical symphony. Engineers in oil-stained overalls bend over blueprints, their brows furrowed as supervisors pace briskly, eyes darting over the nearly completed Tiger and Panther tanks. Generaloberst Heinz Guderian, the father of German armored doctrine, storms through the factory floor, barking orders that echo over the din. "We need armor that can penetrate those T-34s. Beat. Power. Sloped fronts on every turret." He stops in front of a half-built Panther, running his gloved fingers along the angular glassy plate. "This is our answer. It must not fail. A strategic emergency." Reports from the Eastern Front arrive hourly, carried by radio and courier. Frontline commanders describe the resilience, mobility, and sloped armor of the T-34 with growing alarm. Each dispatch paints the same picture. German 50mm and 75mm guns struggle to penetrate at range, wide tracks chew through mud and snow with ease, and crews recover from near-direct hits with extraordinary speed. Major Klaus Reinhardt, a logistics officer, shakes his head as he reads yet another report. "These are not tanks, they are monsters," he mutters under his breath, jotting notes for an urgent meeting with the high command. Meanwhile, factories push for redesigns. The Panther's 75mm KWK-42 gun is rushed into production, its muzzle bristling with promise. Engineers debate armor angles and engine capacity, working feverishly to match the T-34's mobility. Each day the pressure mounts, deadlines collapse, and workers labor in near-constant shifts. German soldiers on the front. Back on the Eastern Front, German tank crews face the T-34 daily. Lieutenant Hans Weber peers from the turret of his Panzer IV, smoke curling around his helmet. His squadron advances across open fields near Orel, engaging the Soviets with meticulously calculated firing positions. Yet for every T-34 they destroy, two more advance from concealed ditches or behind buildings. "These aren't just machines, they think, maneuver, and fight as if alive," Weber reports via radio, frustration edging his voice. The German infantry, once confident, now follow armored support with caution, wary of flanking T-34s that appear seemingly from nowhere. Technological adaptation. Engineers in Berlin and Munich work frantically to reverse-engineer aspects of the T-34. Sloped armor is studied in detail, tracked mobility systems measured, and mass production techniques analyzed. Documents emphasize speed of assembly and ease of repair, key factors that had allowed the Soviets to replenish lost tanks almost overnight. Colonel Erich Müller, in charge of armor design, points at diagrams of Panther and Tiger variants. "If we do not match the T-34, our Eastern campaign is doomed." This is not innovation, it is survival. The T-34's impact on doctrine. Beyond technological changes, German commanders are forced to rethink strategy. Blitzkrieg tactics relying on concentrated armored thrusts encounter unexpected resistance. Wide Soviet formations combined with mobile artillery and T-34s blunt traditional spearheads. Generals debate furiously, should they continue offensive pushes into Soviet territory or adopt a defensive, attritional approach? Each choice carries risk. Oberstleutnant Kruger, newly assigned to the Eastern Front, observes from a hilltop, "We are playing catch-up. The T-34 has changed everything. It forces us into reaction, not action." A glimpse of the future. By late summer 1943, German military theorists concede privately that the T-34 is the single most disruptive armored vehicle they have faced. The need for a heavier, better armed and faster tank becomes the centerpiece of strategy. Yet, despite rushed production, the Panther and Tiger variants cannot immediately replace the sheer numbers, simplicity and versatility of the T-34. In the mud and smoke of Kursk, in the drafting rooms of Berlin, and across the industrial cities of Germany, the lesson is clear. Underestimating the T-34 was a mistake that cannot be repeated. As night falls over the factories and front lines, German engineers and officers alike stare at schematics, reports and battlefield photos. The T-34, once mocked as a crude and simple tank, now casts a long shadow over the Reich's armored ambitions. It has forced innovation, adaptation, and an acknowledgement that sheer audacity and practical design can defeat even the most confident military planning. The war in the East has been irrevocably changed, and the T-34 stands at the heart of this transformation, a steel leviathan whose reputation will echo for decades. July 5, 1943, the Kursk salient, Soviet Union. The morning sun rises weakly over a landscape scarred by trenches, shell craters, and the skeletal remains of burnt-out vehicles. Smoke drifts across the fields, mingling with the sharp tang of cordite and the earthy scent of churned soil. Somewhere in the distance, the low growl of engines signals the approach of German panzers, their steel hulls glinting coldly beneath the hazy light. Inside the command post dug into the hill, Colonel Pavel Ivanovich Kolesnikov studies a series of maps strewn across a wooden table. His eyes are sharp, scanning the contours of the Kursk salient, the positions of artillery and the distribution of infantry. "They think they can break us here. Let them come," he mutters under his breath, brushing ash from his cigarette into the sand. Around him, officers chatter quietly, their voices tense but controlled. T-34s take position. From concealed embankments, Soviet tank crews maneuver T-34s into position. Sergeant Mikhail Petrov peers through the periscope of his tank, noting the approaching lines of panzers on the horizon. His T-34, camouflaged with mud and foliage, seems almost to vanish against the scarred terrain. The wide tracks churn through deep furrows effortlessly, leaving barely a trace. The tank commander signals his crew, and the engines rumble low, a controlled growl ready to erupt into battle. They wait in patient anticipation, knowing that the terrain, speed and sloped armor of the T-34 will be decisive against the advancing Germans. The first clash. At precisely 0800 hours, German panzer divisions reach the Soviet defensive lines. Artillery shells erupt overhead, sending plumes of dirt skyward, but the T-34s are already moving. Wide tracks bite into the soft ground, engines growling as they weave between craters and rubble. Mikhail's T-34 pivots, its turret swinging with smooth precision and fires. The shot connects with a Panther's glassy plate, shattering its front armor. The crew cheers in hushed excitement, adrenaline pumping through their veins. Around them, the Soviet lines surge forward, T-34 after T-34 emerging like ghostly steel predators from concealed positions. Engineering genius in action. Observers, including German field officers who managed to survive initial strikes, note the remarkable design. The T-34's sloped armor deflects shots that would have penetrated the Panzer IV, while the 76.2 mm gun of the medium tank delivers decisive blows at medium ranges. German commanders, previously mocking the T-34 as primitive, now record grim reports in their notebooks. This is not mere machinery, it is battlefield intelligence in metal form. A new form of warfare. The battle spreads across the open fields and hedgerows of Kursk, a chaotic dance of steel, smoke and fire. German tanks attempt to flank Soviet positions, but the mobility and resilience of the T-34 frustrate every maneuver. Mines and anti-tank obstacles, strategically placed by Soviet engineers, slow the panzer's advance, giving T-34 crews time to exploit gaps in the German formations. From the air, Soviet Il-2 ground attack aircraft provide cover, strafing exposed German armor while reconnaissance planes report every German movement back to the command posts. The combination of terrain, tank design and coordinated tactics demonstrates the T-34's revolutionary impact, forcing German divisions into defensive postures they had rarely been forced to assume. German realization. Major Klaus Reinhardt, observing from a forward command vehicle, scribbles frantic notes. They have tanks that are faster, more resilient and easier to repair than ours. Every attack we mount is met with overwhelming fire and mobility. In Berlin, intelligence officers relay reports of German losses and T-34 success, confirming the reality on the ground. Meanwhile, the Krupp factories continue to churn out new Panthers, but each arrives too late to influence the first days of the battle. The Soviets' ability to mass T-34s, maintain them and execute coordinated counterattacks leaves the German commanders stunned and forced into cautious retreats. By the end of July 7, the first major thrusts of Operation Citadel have stalled. T-34s remain in position, their crews weary but unbroken, tanks smeared with mud and smoke. The German army, once confident of a quick breakthrough, now confronts a new reality. The T-34 is not merely a weapon, it is a war-changing machine capable of dictating the tempo, outcome and very nature of combat on the Eastern Front. The battlefield has shifted, the rules have changed, and the German generals who once laughed at the T-34 now stare in disbelief at the steel juggernauts that tore through their plans. January 12, 1943. Outside the ruined outskirts of Stalingrad, the air is thick with smoke and the metallic tang of blood and artillery. Snow crunches beneath the boots of Red Army infantrymen as they spread across frozen streets, their breath fogging in the icy dawn. Among them, the rumble of T-34s grows louder, low and menacing, echoing off collapsed brick walls and scorched factories. Captain Alexei Morozov sits atop a T-34 command turret, peering through a frost-smeared periscope as a column of his comrades' tanks snakes behind him. The German Sixth Army, once confident in its ability to crush Soviet armor, scrambles to react. Panzer IVs and the newly issued Tiger prototypes shudder under the unexpected resilience of the T-34s. Sloped armor deflects shells that would have shredded earlier models, while wide tracks churn over ice and rubble that immobilize even the best-trained German crews. The Soviets move with disciplined coordination. Tank commanders use low radio chatter, hand signals and pre-planned maneuvers to envelop isolated German positions. Each T-34 carries a story, a factory worker turned soldier, a mechanic turned driver, a nation's hope embedded in steel. As Morozov leads a flanking maneuver against a fortified German supply depot, the tank lurches over broken tram lines and debris-strewn streets. Inside, the crew exchanges terse commands: left flank clear. Fire at will. Cover our infantry. Outside, soldiers advance alongside, using the T-34's presence as moving fortifications against machine gun fire. The German defenders, accustomed to rapid victories over inferior tanks, find themselves trapped in a nightmare of armor, mobility, and tactical surprise. Smoke from burning Panzer IVs drifts skyward, and Morozov feels the pulse of victory as shells impact harmlessly against their hull. This winter campaign becomes a turning point. Reports reach the German high command that entire battalions have been overrun by what they still underestimate as crude Soviet machines. Field Marshal von Paulus notes in his diary, "Their armor resists our fire, their speed defies our calculations. The T-34 is no mere tank, it is a weapon of transformation." Engineers at the front scramble to reinforce existing tanks and develop the dreaded Panther, a direct response to this new standard of Soviet design. Meanwhile, every Soviet tank driver knows the T-34 is more than machinery. It is a symbol of resilience, of the motherland rising against invaders, and of hope in the freezing chaos of the Eastern Front. February 4, 1943. A gray dawn breaks over the industrial outskirts of Berlin, the city still scarred by Allied bombing raids, smoke curling from factories that strain to meet the demands of a faltering war machine. Inside a dimly lit briefing room at the Reich Ministry of Armaments, General Oberst Heinz Guderian slams a map onto the table, scattering pencil marks and reports across the surface. Across from him, engineers and tank designers huddle over schematics, their eyes wide with urgency. Reports from the Eastern Front have arrived in unrelenting waves. T-34s are overwhelming positions, tearing through panzer divisions with impunity, and German infantry is struggling to contain Soviet advances. The room buzzes with tension. "We cannot face these beasts with outdated Panzer IVs," Guderian asserts, voice sharp, echoing against concrete walls. "We need armor that matches the sloped plates, the mobility, the resilience." Every day we delay, we bleed men and material. Designers sketch feverishly, calculating armor thickness, engine output, and new 75mm and 88mm gun placements. They debate track width, suspension systems, and hull angles. The Panther tank is born from this crucible of panic and innovation, a desperate attempt to reclaim parity against the very machine they once mocked. Meanwhile, in the factories of Kharkov and Nizhny Tagil, Soviet engineers continue to refine the T-34. Additions like improved radios, wider tracks for deep mud, and more powerful guns emerge from assembly lines operating at a frenzied pace. Every destroyed tank becomes a lesson learned, every battlefield encounter an opportunity to refine tactics. Red Army commanders integrate combined arms strategies, coordinating infantry, artillery, and T-34s in a symphony of calculated offense. Back on the front lines, Lieutenant Ivan Petrov commands a small company of T-34s moving through snow-laden forests near Kursk. The engines growl as they crest ridges and charge into open fields, shells kicking up plumes of frozen earth. German anti-tank units attempt to halt them, but the Soviet sloped armor deflects shots that would have ended lesser tanks. Petrov glances at his crew, faces smeared with soot and frost, and nods. "Forward," he says. "We push. For every meter we gain, the motherland breathes easier." Each T-34 becomes an extension of its crew's will, their determination turning metal into both shield and sword. The German High Command watches in horror as battlefield losses mount. Reports of entire panzer regiments neutralized by the very tank they dismissed circulate like wildfire. Adolf Hitler, enraged by the growing number of setbacks, demands accelerated production and innovative designs, yet resources are strained and morale begins to fray. Across the Eastern Front, the T-34 emerges not just as a machine but as a psychological weapon, instilling fear in officers who once derided it, and pride in Soviet soldiers who drive it. March 12, 1944. The snows of Belarus are melting into a patchwork of mud and ice, rivers swollen and sluggish. The Eastern Front stretches endlessly, a vast mosaic of destruction, shattered villages and scorched fields. From atop a battered observation tower near Orsha, General Feldmarschall Walter Model surveys the front lines through binoculars, his breath fogging in the icy air. Columns of T-34s glide across frozen plains with uncanny efficiency, their tracks chewing through mud and snow alike. German defenses, dug meticulously over months, are being torn apart not by overwhelming numbers, but by innovation, a relentless, mobile steel tide. Inside command bunkers, generals huddle over reports. Casualty figures are grim. Entire divisions have been decimated by the maneuverability and firepower of the T-34. The once dismissive murmurs about Soviet tank crudeness have vanished, replaced by disbelief and a grudging respect for the engineering prowess behind the machines. "They've changed everything," mutters Oberst Gunther von Kluge, fingers tracing the lines on a map marked with Soviet advances. "Our tactics, our armor, it's all obsolete against these tanks." Across the front, Sergeant Nikolai Sokolov maneuvers his T-34 through a shattered village. Houses reduced to rubble provide intermittent cover as German 88mm shells whistle past. His co-driver adjusts the gun elevation, aiming at a distant Panzer IV attempting to flank. "Hold steady," Sokolov orders, voice calm despite the chaos. With a controlled burst, the German tank erupts in smoke and fire, leaving the crew stunned, retreating. Around him, his comrades echo the silent rhythm of the T-34s. A relentless forward push that exemplifies not just mechanized power, but the resolve of an entire army. Back in Berlin, Hitler is briefed yet again on the mounting disaster. Engineers and generals present blueprints for the Tiger and Panther tanks, desperate attempts to reclaim initiative, but they arrive too late to stem the tide of T-34s dominating the vast expanse of the Eastern Front. Every new German design is a reactive measure, conceived in urgency, while the Soviets continue refining an already revolutionary tank. Intelligence reports detail how the T-34s adapt to winter conditions, mud and forests that had previously been thought impassable. The Germans, for the first time, face an enemy whose equipment dictates the tempo of the war rather than their own. Yet the T-34 is more than metal and firepower, it embodies the spirit of Soviet resistance. Across destroyed cities and frozen plains, soldiers rally behind the tanks, understanding that the war's momentum now hinges on their mobility and armor. Each successful engagement spreads both fear among German ranks and hope among the oppressed populations liberated by the Red Army. Tales of T-34 crews holding key crossings, breaking sieges and cutting supply lines become legendary, whispered among infantry and recorded meticulously in Soviet dispatches. As spring deepens into summer, the Eastern Front continues its grueling advance. T-34's spearhead offensives, rolling into Poland and the Baltic states, their presence reshaping the map and forcing Germany into defensive retreats. The once mock tank has transformed the landscape of armored warfare, compelling the Wehrmacht to rethink strategy, design new tanks, and accept that the Soviet Union has achieved technological parity, if not superiority, on land. The sloped armor, wide tracks, and mechanical resilience that once inspired ridicule are now the gold standard in tank design, influencing both Allied and Axis developments for years to come. By mid-1944, the T-34's dominance is indisputable. It has become a symbol of ingenuity, resilience, and industrial efficiency, its very existence forcing Hitler's generals to acknowledge a stark truth. They underestimated an enemy not only willing to fight but capable of revolutionizing the tools of war. The Eastern Front, once thought to be a predictable theater for German armored might, is now a proving ground where the T-34 dictates the terms of engagement, proving that innovation, when combined with strategy and courage, can topple even the most arrogant of military assumptions. June 22, 1944. Near the banks of the Dnieper River, the morning fog clings to the shattered forest lines like a ghostly curtain. A-34 crests a ridge, its engine coughing clouds of smoke into the gray light. Inside, Lieutenant Sergei Ivanov checks his crew, young men whose faces are streaked with grime, exhaustion, and determination. Each has seen friends fall, villages burn, and rivers freeze beneath artillery fire. Yet in this moment, as their tank advances, there is focus, a symbiotic trust between man and machine. Every lever, every gear, every hatch becomes an extension of their will. Outside, German reconnaissance units recoil at the sight of the T-34 surging forward. Private Hermann Weiss, a young panzer grenadier, freezes as a T-34 bursts from cover, its 76.2 mm gun leveling with precision. His squad scrambles for cover, realizing that the Soviet tank's speed and sloped armor make conventional anti-tank tactics perilously inadequate. Fear, frustration, and awe intertwine as he witnesses the tank flatten defenses once thought impregnable. In Soviet command posts, commanders pore over maps dotted with red arrows indicating T-34-led offensives. Colonel Mikhail Petrov, a veteran of multiple winter campaigns, notes the operational flexibility of his armored units. The T-34s allow deep penetrations behind German lines, cutting off supply routes and isolating pockets of resistance. Officers write detailed reports on terrain adaptability, armor resilience, and mechanical endurance, an analytical approach to a tank often thought crude but now proven indispensable. Meanwhile, German generals convene in hastily reinforced bunkers, their faces taut with tension. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein leans over maps marked with intersecting red and black lines. Each T-34 advance forces a recalculation. Every engagement underscores the disparity in mobility and armor technology. The mocking laughter once shared over Soviet engineering prowess has long since vanished, replaced by grim mutters and demands for accelerated development of the Panther and Tiger programs. The war that Hitler envisioned, one of mechanized precision under German dominance, is being rewritten by Soviet innovation. Back in the villages caught between advancing fronts, civilians glimpse the T-34s as both liberators and instruments of war. Smoke curls above barns and factories, dogs scatter into the underbrush as tanks rumble through streets, crushing debris and remnants of occupation. The human toll is palpable, yet for the Red Army each village secured, each bridge seized, represents a tangible shift in momentum, made possible by a machine that began its life as underestimated steel and rivets. By late summer 1944, the T-34's legacy extends beyond the battlefield. Its presence shapes the morale of soldiers, the calculations of generals, and the strategic outlook of the Eastern Front. It has become more than a weapon, it is a statement that adaptability, ingenuity, and resilience can overturn even the most rigid assumptions of war. Its crews carry stories of daring maneuvers, of perilous crossings, and of moments where the combination of human skill and armored engineering changes the course of entire operations. As night falls, the T-34s settle into bivouacs alongside rivers and forests, engines idling as soldiers tend to their machines, repairing tracks, oiling gears, and sharing quiet words of camaraderie. The steel hulls, battered and mud-slick, reflect the dim glow of lanterns, a testament to endurance and innovation. Tomorrow they will move again, leading the Red Army into new territories, continuing the relentless push that has redefined armored warfare. January 1945. Eastern Poland just beyond the Vistula River. The ground is frozen solid, frost cracking under the weight of tanks, artillery and marching infantry. Smoke rises from smoldering villages, black against the gray winter sky, mingling with the whine of engines and distant gunfire. Captain Heinrich Bauer of the German 6th Panzer Division wipes frost from his goggles and stares across the open plain. The horizon is alive with movement. T-34s rumbling steadily in formation, their wide tracks carving smooth swaths through the snow, sloped armor glinting in pale sunlight. Bauer's radio crackles with frantic reports. His unit had prepared meticulously for Soviet attacks, yet the T-34s, once dismissed as crude, oversized toys, crushed defensive positions with astonishing efficiency. Infantry trenches collapse under indirect fire from 76mm guns. Anti-tank emplacements are flattened in seconds. The German Tiger tanks, superior in firepower but slower and fewer in number, struggle to match the speed and mobility of the Soviets. Bauer tightens his jaw as he notes yet another column of T-34s pivoting and striking at his flank, seemingly aware of every weak point in the German line. Sergeant Wilhelm Koch, manning a Pak-40 anti-tank gun, fires round after round. Each shell thuds into snow, bouncing off the sloped sides of the T-34s, deflecting harmlessly. "They said these were nothing," he mutters, voice trembling with disbelief. Around him, fellow soldiers scramble to reposition. The Soviets advance with a mixture of audacity and mechanical precision, tanks emerging from woods, villages and frozen riverbeds like unstoppable juggernauts. Their crews, young and determined, shout orders across the hatches, engines growling, machine guns rattling. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Alexei Petrov, commanding a T-34 platoon, pushes forward, navigating frozen terrain that would stall lesser tanks. He glances at the map strapped to his knee, eyes tracking the German strongpoints and artillery lines. A small smile crosses his face as his tank glides effortlessly over ice and rubble alike. Petrov's orders are simple: keep moving, keep the pressure, exploit every gap. The T-34s respond with mechanical grace, almost as if anticipating their crew's intent. German engineers scramble to upgrade and modify their panzer lines, reinforcing armor, retrofitting guns and planning ambushes. Yet with every skirmish it becomes clearer: the T-34 has redefined the battlefield. Its combination of speed, sloped armor and reliability allows the Red Army to strike where German calculations predicted stagnation. Bauer realizes, amid the chaos, that the war has changed fundamentally. Tanks once considered inferior have forced the German high command to adapt, or perish. By dusk, the snow-dusted plains are littered with the remnants of fierce encounters. Burned-out German half-tracks and toppled artillery pieces lie alongside craters and frozen bodies, stark against the white expanse. The T-34s, though bearing scratches and shrapnel, remain operational, advancing steadily toward strategic objectives. For every German unit overwhelmed, another T-34 rolls forward, relentless, an embodiment of Soviet engineering and resolve. The officers in the German High Command, receiving fragmented reports from the Eastern Front, begin to grasp the truth. The tanks they once mocked as crude are now the spearhead of Soviet offensives, forcing a complete redesign of anti-tank strategy. Orders for heavier guns, redesigned armor, and new tactical doctrines flood from Berlin, but the T-34s continue to outpace adaptation. As night falls, Bauer writes a terse note in his field log: "We underestimated them. These machines, once dismissed, dictate the terms of engagement. Germany's armor cannot hold as it once did." The snow continues to fall, silent witnesses to the destructive power unleashed by vehicles once laughed at, now feared across the Eastern Front. The T-34's legend is no longer just in design, it is in action, endurance, and the unyielding momentum of Soviet forces rolling inexorably westward. For the men who had scorned it, the realization is bitter. Innovation, cunning, and audacity have turned what they deemed inferior into the dominant force of the Eastern Front. Spring 1945. Berlin, the Reich Chancellery. Maps, charts, and reconnaissance photos are strewn across heavy oak tables. Generals and staff officers confer in low, urgent tones, their faces etched with exhaustion, disbelief, and dawning comprehension. Among them, General Heinz Guderian leans back, eyes scanning a series of Soviet battlefield reports, each one detailing T-34 engagements across Poland, East Prussia, and the approaches to Berlin. He sets down his pen and murmurs almost to himself, "This is no longer merely a tank. It is a weapon of inevitability." Across the Soviet Union, Red Army historians, engineers, and tank crews celebrate quietly in letters and journals. The T-34, conceived in Moscow workshops, tested in harsh winter trials, and deployed in staggering numbers, has altered the course of mechanized warfare. Its wide tracks, capable of traversing mud, snow, and rubble, ensured mobility where German armor faltered. Its sloped armor made standard panzer shells ricochet, and its 76.2 mm gun could penetrate even the heaviest enemy vehicles with precision. In the factories of Kharkov and Stalingrad, workers recall the long nights spent hammering, welding, and testing. Engineers like Mikhail Koshkin, who had championed the T-34's design despite skepticism from bureaucrats, finally see their vision vindicated. Photographs show tanks lined up like soldiers themselves, ready to advance on fronts previously thought secure. The combination of ingenuity, simplicity, and mass production had created a vehicle that was not only formidable in battle but resilient to the chaos of war. Meanwhile, in the destroyed villages and plains of Eastern Europe, remnants of German armor lie abandoned, crushed, or burning. Survivors recount encounters with the T-34 with a mixture of awe and fear. For many Wehrmacht soldiers, these encounters were their first and lasting lessons in underestimating an enemy's capability. Lieutenant Colonel Fritz Bauer writes in a private memoir, "We laughed at their crude tanks. We mocked their steel. But the T-34 was a teacher, and we were students learning at the cost of our lives." Military academies across the world would later analyze these campaigns, studying the T-34's design philosophy: simplicity for mass production, armor sloped for deflection, mobility to exploit terrain, and reliability in adverse conditions. These principles, they conclude, were revolutionary, foreshadowing post-war tank doctrines and influencing armored warfare for decades. In Moscow, a modest ceremony honors the surviving crews of the T-34, recognizing not only their bravery but the machines that carried them through the harshest battles of the Eastern Front. The tanks, scarred and battered from months of combat, stand as silent monuments to innovation and perseverance. Engineers and officers share stories of how these vehicles endured mud, snow, shellfire, and exhaustion to sustain the momentum of Soviet offensives. As the war in Europe concludes, the T-34's influence becomes indisputable. German generals, once dismissive, admit in debriefings and captured reports that the tank forced them to redesign anti-tank tactics, reconsider armored doctrine, and confront the limits of their assumptions. For historians, the T-34 symbolizes a pivotal turning point, a triumph of engineering and foresight over hubris, shaping the outcome of one of history's largest and deadliest conflicts. Even decades later, veterans and scholars recall the T-34 not just as a machine, but as a symbol of resilience, adaptability, and the power of innovative thinking in the crucible of war. Where once Hitler's officers had mocked it, the T-34 had carved a path through Europe, leaving a legacy that would endure in military history and collective memory alike. September 1945. Berlin lies in ruins, streets scarred by months of artillery, fire, and aerial bombardment. Among the rubble, a group of former Wehrmacht officers sits quietly in makeshift quarters, poring over the final pages of intelligence dossiers captured from Soviet archives. The T-34 dominates every report, every tactical analysis. General Hans von Funk leans back in a splintered chair, rubbing his temples, and mutters to no one in particular, "We did not lose to men alone, we lost to steel and imagination." Across the Soviet Union, veterans of the Armored Corps return home, tanks still bearing the dents and marks of relentless combat. Families greet them with cautious joy, and children run their hands over the familiar contours of the T-34, unaware that these machines had once decided the fate of entire armies. In workshops, engineers sketched the next generation of armored vehicles, inspired by the T-34's elegant combination of power, mobility, and simplicity. In military academies from Moscow to London, Berlin to Washington, the T-34 becomes a case study. Cadets examine its sloped armor, wide tracks, and tactical deployments in lectures that blend engineering, strategy, and human courage. The lessons are clear. Underestimating an opponent, dismissing innovation, and relying solely on tradition can carry catastrophic consequences. For generations of strategists, the T-34 embodies the intersection of ingenuity and battlefield reality. Personal memoirs and wartime diaries reveal another layer of the story. Soviet crews recount nights spent in freezing tanks, maneuvering through forests, fields, and cities, their engines humming in rhythm with their heartbeat. German soldiers recall the shock and awe of facing these tanks for the first time, initially scoffing, then desperately recalculating, and finally retreating in the face of an armored adversary they had never imagined. The T-34 was not merely a weapon, it was a revelation. Even decades later, surviving T-34s are displayed in museums, standing as solemn reminders of innovation forged in conflict. Veterans gather, recounting tales of camaraderie, peril, and ingenuity. Engineers and historians trace the lineage of modern armored vehicles back to these tanks, acknowledging that the T-34's design principles, simplicity, reliability, and adaptability, remain central to military engineering today. In Moscow, a quiet ceremony honors Mikhail Koshkin and the teams of designers, engineers, and factory workers whose efforts made the T-34 possible. Flowers are laid at memorials, speeches recount the tank's achievements, and a generation of Russians is reminded of the extraordinary ingenuity born from necessity. The T-34's legacy endures not only in steel and strategy but in memory. It transformed armored warfare, altered the course of the Eastern Front, and left a permanent mark on the global understanding of military innovation. Hitler's officers, who once mocked the Soviet tank as crude and inadequate, could only reconcile their defeat with a grudging respect for the engineering brilliance that had swept across Europe. As history reflects, the T-34 was more than a weapon. It was a turning point, a testament to the power of vision, resilience, and ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds. Its roar echoed through the vast Eastern Front, its tracks carving the path of victory, and its shadow shaped the strategies of armies for generations to come.